Hey class. So I'm going to read you chapter 8. When we last left off for chapter 7, the children had gone to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver's house to have some dinner and hopefully find out what's going on, right? They sort of trusted the Beavers, and they were going to find out whatever information they were looking for. Now, I want you to keep in mind that in our last session that we talked about with the elements of fantasy, we talked about how as readers, we're finding out things the same time that the characters are finding out. So at this point, there's not really anything that we know ahead of them, okay? We don't know what's going on. We don't know what happened to Mr. Tumnus. We can assume that maybe he was captured by the White Witch, but we're going to be learning things alongside the main character, okay? So pay close attention to the stories that Mr. Beaver might tell and any other information that he wants to share with the children, because they're learning and you as a reader are learning, okay? And this is where they're going to give us important information so that we can go ahead and we can infer and make better decisions about how we feel, maybe about certain characters and things like that. Okay, but before we get started, some vocabulary words for chapter 8. Stratagem is a strategy, like a plan, okay? Peddlers are people who sell things door to door. Simple, in this case, means very foolish. So if you have a simple mind, it might mean that you're very foolish. A jinn is a race of supernatural creatures or genies. Okay, fits in with our fantasy word. Some expressions that you will hear are time out of mind, okay, as long as anyone can remember. And mark my words, and I think you've all heard that. Mark my words. Pay attention, remember what I say. All right, so let's get started. Chapter 8, what happened after dinner? "And now," said Lucy, "do please tell us what happened to Mr. Tumnus." That's bad," said Mr. Beaver, shaking his head. "That's a very, very bad thing. Bad business. There's no doubt he was taken off by the police." "I got that from a bird who saw it done." "But where's he been taken to?" asked Lucy. "Well, they were heading northward when they were last seen, and we all know what that means. Now, if you remember, the sign in Mr. Tumnus's cave said that he was taken by order of the Queen of Narnia's police because he was fraternizing with humans, which means that he was being friendly with humans, and that human was Lucy. So somehow they found out that Mr. Tumnus was with Lucy. What do you think it was? Was there somebody in there that maybe told somebody that Lucy had been in there? Do you remember? Think back to when Edmund was first in Narnia, right? And he met the Queen. And he said, "Well, my sister Lucy." Oh, he was talking about a fawn. Could it have been Edmund? "No, we don't," said Susan. Mr. Beaver shook his head in a very gloomy fashion. "I'm afraid it means they were taking him to her house," he said. "But what'll they do to him, Mr. Beaver?" gasped Lucy. "Well," said Mr. Beaver, "you can't exactly say for sure, but there's not many taken in there that ever come out again. Statues, all full of statues, they say it is, in the courtyard, up the stairs, and in the hall. People she's turned," he paused and shuddered. "People she's turned into stone." "But, Mr. Beaver," said Lucy, "can't we? We must do something to save him. It's too dreadful, and it's all on my account," meaning it's all my fault. "I don't doubt you'd save him if you could, dearie," said Mrs. Beaver, "but you've no chance of getting into that house against her will and ever coming out alive." "Couldn't we have some stratagem, some strategy, some plan?" said Peter. Couldn't we dress up or something? Or maybe pretend to be, I don't know, peddlers or anything? Or watch till she was gone out? Or, I don't know, hang it all? There must be some way." "This fawn saved my sister at his own risk, Mr. Beaver. We can't just leave him to have that done to him." "It's no good, son of Adam," said Mr. Beaver. "No good you're trying, of all people, but now that Aslan is on the move." "Oh, yes, tell us about Aslan," said several voices at once. For once again that strange feeling like the first signs of spring, like good news, had come over them. For us, maybe like the sun shining. "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan. "Aslan?" said Mr. Beaver. "Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood, but not often here, you understand. Never in my time or my father's time. But the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen, all right. It is he, not you, that will save Mr. Tumnus." "She won't turn him into stone?" said Edmund. "Lord love you, son of Adam, what a simple thing to say, what a foolish thing to say," answered Mr. Beaver with a great laugh. "Turn him into stone? If she can stand on her 2 feet and look him in the face, it'll be the most that she can do, and more than I expect of her. No, no, he'll put all to rights, as it says in an old rhyme in these parts. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again." Notice that Edmund was the one that said, "Well, won't she turn him into stone too?" Aslan, the sound of his roar, and when he bares his teeth, so when he shows his teeth. So I don't know any humans that roar. Okay. I'm thinking that he's an animal. Okay. "You'll understand when you see him," said Mr. Beaver. "But shall we see him?" asked Susan. "Why, daughter of Eve, that's why I brought you here. I'll to lead you where you shall meet him," said Mr. Beaver. Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "Aslan, a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you he is the king of the wood, and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion." "Ooh," said Susan, "I thought he was a man." "Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "So he's not safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." "I'm longing to see him," said Peter, "even if I do feel frightened when it comes to the point." "That's right, son of Adam," said Mr. Beaver, bringing his paw down on the table with a crash that made all the cups and saucers rattle. "And so you shall. Word has been sent that you are to meet him, tomorrow if you can, at the stone table." "Where's that?" said Lucy. "I'll show you," said Mr. Beaver. "It's down the river, a good step from here. I'll take you to it." "But meanwhile, what about poor Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. Okay, so now they're all sitting here at the table. Okay, Mr. Beaver is telling them about Aslan and how they have to go and meet Aslan. So just picture that. Picture them like, I'll show you that picture again. Okay, from the last time we read. They're all just sitting around talking, and this is like storytelling time. And this is time where, as readers, we are finding out information that the characters don't even know at this point. So we're learning as the characters are learning. And it's like I said, it's just like a conversation. They're just telling the story, telling information to give the characters that information and also the readers. Now I lost where I was. Okay, but meanwhile, what about poor Mr. Tumnus? Said Lucy. "The quickest way you can help him is by going to meet Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. "Once he's with us, then we can begin doing things. Not that we don't need you too, for that's another of the old rhymes. When Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at Cair Paravel enthroned, the evil time will be over and done." And do you remember they call the kids sons of Adam? men, boys. So things must be drawing near the end now that he's come and you've come. We've heard of Aslan coming to these parts before, long ago. Nobody can say when. But there's never been any of your race here before. No humans here before. I hope you can't hear my kids screaming at each other in the basement. That's what I don't understand, Mr. Beaver, said Peter. I mean, isn't the White Witch herself human? She'd like us to believe it, said Mr. Beaver, and it's on that she bases her claim to be queen. But she's no daughter of Eve. She comes of your father Adam's. Here, Mr. Beaver bowed. Your father Adam's first wife. Her they called Lilith. And she was one of the jinn. That's what she comes from on one side. And on the other, she comes of the giants. No, there isn't a drop of real human blood in the witch. That's why she's bad through and through, Mr. Beaver, said Mrs. Beaver. True enough. So the White Witch, Queen of Narnia, she calls herself, she's not actually human. She's half jinn, which is like that mythical creature, and she's half giant, okay? So even though she might look human, she's not, okay? True enough, Mrs. Beaver, replied he. There may be two views about humans, meaning no offense to the present company. But there's no two views about things that look like humans and aren't. I've known good dwarfs, said Mrs. Beaver. So have I. Now you've come to speak of it, said her husband. But precious few, and they were the ones least like men. So they're saying that there are good humans and bad humans. There may be good dwarves and bad dwarves. Okay, in their case, maybe good beavers and bad beavers. But for what the queen or the White Witch is made of, there's no good and bad. She's only bad. But in general, take my advice. When you meet anything that's going to be human and isn't yet, or used to be human once and isn't now, or ought to be human and isn't, you keep your eyes on it and you feel for your hatchet. And that's why the White Witch is always on the lookout for any humans in Narnia. She's been watching for you this many a year, and if she knew that there were 4 of you, she'd be even more dangerous. What's that to do with it? Asked Peter. Because of another prophecy, said Mr. Beaver. So a prophecy is like something that's going to happen, that's supposed to happen. Down at Cair Paravel, that's the castle on the seacoast, down at the mouth of this river, which ought to be the capital of the whole country, if all was as it should be. Down at Cair Paravel, there are 4 thrones. And its saying is that when 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit in those 4 thrones, then it will be the end, not only of the White Witch's reign, but of her life. And that is why we have to be so cautious as we come along. For if she knew about you 4, your lives wouldn't be worth a shake of my whisker. Here's the question, though. Doesn't she know that there are 4 of them? How does she know? Edmund. I don't want to think that Edmund, of course, he didn't know that she was the White Witch when he talked to her and when she was giving him all of those Turkish delight and that hot drink that he had. It was like a hot cocoa, right? And he was just like, oh, yeah, there's 4 of us. I have 2 sisters, and there's me, and there's 1 other brother. So he's just giving her all this information. So the beaver does not know that, okay? Trying to think if there's something else I want to tell you, but maybe not yet. All the children had been attending so hard to what Mr. Beaver was telling them that they had noticed nothing else for a long time. All the children had been attending so hard to what Mr. Beaver was telling them that they had not noticed anything else for a long time. Then, during the moment of silence that followed his last remark, Lucy suddenly said, "Hey, has anyone seen Edmund?" There was a dreadful pause, and then everyone began asking, "Well, who saw him last? How long has he been missing? Is he outside?" And then all rushed to the door and looked out. The snow was falling thickly and steadily. The green ice of the pool had vanished under a thick white blanket of snow, and from where the little house stood in the center of the dam, you could hardly see either bank. Out they went, plunging well over their ankles into the snow. and went around the house in every direction. "Edmund! Edmund!" they called till they were hoarse, till their voices were gone. But the silently falling snow seemed to muffle their voices. "How perfectly dreadful!" said Susan as they last came into despair. "Oh, how I wish we'd never come!" "What on earth are we to do, Mr. Beaver?" said Peter. "Do?" said Mr. Beaver, who was already putting on his snow boots. "Do? We must be off at once. We haven't a moment to spare." "We'd better divide into 4 search parties," said Peter. "All go in different directions. Whoever finds him must come back here at once and—" "Search parties, son of Adam?" said Mr. Beaver. "Well, what for?" "Why, to look for Edmund, of course." "There's no point in looking for him," said Mr. Beaver. "What do you mean?" said Susan. "He can't be far away yet. We've got to find him. What do you mean when you say there's no use looking for him?" "The reason there's no use looking," said Mr. Beaver, "is that we know already where he's gone." Everyone stared in amazement. "Think. Where do you think he's gone?" He left. Where do you think he could be going?" Everyone stared in amazement. "Don't you understand?" said Mr. Beaver. "He's gone to her, the White Witch. He has betrayed us all." "Oh, surely, oh, really," said Susan. "He can't have done that." "Can't he?" said Mr. Beaver, looking very hard at the 3 children. And everything they wanted to say died on their lips, for each felt suddenly quite certain, inside, that this is exactly what Edmund had done. "But will he know the way?" said Peter. "Has he been in this country before?" asked Mr. Beaver. "Has he ever been here alone?" "Yes," said Lucy, almost in a whisper. "I am afraid he has." "And did he tell you what he'd done or who he'd met?" "Well, no, he didn't," said Lucy. "Then mark my words," said Mr. Beaver. "He has already met the White Witch, and he joined her side, and been told where she lives. I didn't like to mention it before. He was your brother and all. But the moment I set eyes on that brother of yours, I said to myself, 'Treacherous.' He had the look of one who has been with the witch and eaten her food. You can always tell them if you've lived long in Narnia. Something about their eyes." Kind of crazy to think, right? "All the same," said Peter in a rather choking sort of voice, "we'll still have to go out and look for him. He's our brother, after all, even if he is a rather little beast. And he's only a kid." "Go to the witch's house?" said Mrs. Beaver. "Don't you see the only chance of saving either him or yourselves is to keep away from her?" "How do you mean?" said Lucy. "Why, all she wants is to get all 4 of you. She's thinking all the time of those 4 thrones at Caraparavel. Once you were all 4 inside her house, her job would be done. There'd be 4 new statues in her collection before you'd have time to speak. But she'd keep him alive as long as he's the only one she's got, because she'll want to use him as a decoy, as bait to catch the rest of you." "Oh, can no one help us?" wailed Lucy. "Only Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. "We must go on and meet him. That's our only chance now." "It seems to me, my dears," said Mrs. Beaver, "that it's very important to know just when he slipped away. How much can he tell her? It depends on how much he heard. For instance, had we started talking about Aslan before he left? If not, then we may do very well, for she won't know that Aslan has come to Narnia, or that we're meeting him, and it will be quite off her guard as far as that is concerned." "Well, I just don't remember him being here at all, especially when we started talking about Aslan," said Peter. But Lucy interrupted him. "Oh, yes, he was here. Don't you remember? It was he who asked whether the witch couldn't turn Aslan into stone, too." "So he did, by Jove," said Peter. "Just the sort of thing he would say, too." "Worse and worse," said Mr. Beaver. "And the next thing is, was he still there? Was he still here when I told you the place for meeting Aslan was the stone table?" Of course, no one knew the answer to this question. "Because if he was," continued Mr. Beaver, "then she'll simply sledge down in that direction and get between us and the stone table and catch us on our way down. In fact, we shall be cut off from Aslan." "But that isn't what she'll do first," said Mrs. Beaver. "Not if I know her. The moment that Edmund tells her that we're all here, she's going to set out to catch us this very night. And if he's been gone about half an hour, she'll be here in about 20 minutes. You're right, Mrs. Beaver, said her husband. We must all get away from here. There's not a moment to lose. We're going to stop there. I want you to think about Edmund as a character. Some of you in the first couple of chapters said, oh, he was kind. But from the moment we met Edmund, we knew that he really wasn't, right? And now to think that Edmund is betraying his whole family, right? His brother and his sisters, and is going to the White Witch to tell him that they're all here and they're at the Beaver's house. I mean, you have to know that Edmund is going to do that. Where else would he be? So I just want to get that thought into your head. What do you think about Edmund? What are some of his character traits? We know that he's untrustworthy, right? He's dishonest. At this point, I would say he's sneaky, okay? So take a look at Edmund in your mind and just how you feel about him and what kind of character you think he is. We talk about characters and changing. At this point, we're about a little more than halfway through the book, and Edmund is still as beastly as ever, right? If not worse. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm looking forward to reading the rest with you. All right. Bye.